Don't open Toronto with the CN Tower. Make the tower wait in the lobby. Open with a route by the lake. A route so busy it probably wanted a lunch break. Long before a colonial town showed up, Indigenous peoples were already here. Living here, traveling here, trading through this place. The map had people on it. It had footsteps, canoes, river mouths, and memory. Not a blank page. Not even close. Then colonial paperwork arrived. Paperwork has a dangerous hobby, making messy land look neat. The page looked tidy. The reality was not tidy. In the late 1700s, British officials stared at Lake Ontario. They saw a harbor, a back door, and a very useful shortcut. In 1793, York stepped onto the stage. Fort York stood by the water like a nervous doorman. But a lake is fair in the most annoying way. It brings cargo in. It brings trouble in too. In 1813, American troops came by boat. The town was hit, and a powder magazine turned into a regrettable firework. So Toronto learned rule number 1. Water makes you money, and water makes you reachable. In 1834, York became Toronto. Basically, the city changed its profile picture. But the name did not make it big. The port did. The warehouses did. The trains did. The people did. In the 1850s, rail arrived. The small town got dragged into a much larger business loop. Rails pulled. Streets stretched. The city flattened out like dough under a rolling pin. Then in 1904, fire put an exclamation mark on the warehouse district. The city learned a second rule. Do not arrange wooden buildings like snacks on a skewer. After that, more people kept arriving. From Europe, the Caribbean, Asia, and everywhere the route could reach. The old lake route became a mixer. Not a polite mixer. A loud one with luggage. So today's Toronto is not just a forest of towers. The skyline is the receipt, not the origin story. Toronto is a route that got argued into a city. Now pull that route apart. It was not a cute little footpath. It was a human energy-saving machine. Lake Simcoe sat to the north. Lake Ontario sat to the south. Between them were river valleys, wetlands, slopes, and the universal human question. Why am I carrying this again? That was the job of the Toronto carrying place. Canoes used water when water was available. When it was not, humans got out and carried the stuff. Here is the first cold fact of city history. Many cities do not begin because a view is pretty. They begin because somebody carrying something says, absolutely not. Then somebody invents a transfer point. Congratulations, urbanism. Early Toronto's superpower was not a skyline. It was changing boats, changing goods, and changing direction. Use a route enough, and people gather. People gather, trade gathers. Trade gathers, and the map starts putting on weight. French traders, British officials, merchants, and armies all smelled the route. They did not see a romantic lake view. They saw a power strip. One end was the lake. One end was the interior. Control the plug, and everyone else walks farther. So the harbor became serious. Ships came in. Goods came off. Documents appeared. The abacus started sweating. But the most dangerous object in a city is not always a cannon. Sometimes it is a quiet piece of paper. The Toronto Purchase is the paper in this story. The 1787 deed later raised major questions. One of them was painfully basic. What land did the deed actually describe? That is not a typo-level problem. That is a city foundation-level problem. In 1805, the Crown made a new agreement with the Mississaugas of the credit. The dispute did not simply vanish. A Toronto Purchase claim was settled in 2010. So Toronto did not grow out of a clean permission slip. It grew out of route, trade, colonial power, dispute, and memory. That sound under the floorboards matters. Then the British put a lock on the route. John Graves Simcoe founded York in 1793. Fort York was the lock by the water. It was not a fairy tale castle. It was a security booth with a musket and anxiety. Because if you defend a lake, congratulations. The other side can also use the lake. In 1813, the Battle of York proved that point. American forces attacked. The powder magazine exploded into the kind of lesson nobody wants twice. Fort York was rebuilt. Some of its old buildings still stand. They are the city's old teeth, not glamorous, but very useful for biting history. Now picture York as a little capital with muddy boots. It had politics, a port, soldiers, carts, taverns, and complaints. People later called it Muddy York for a reason. Before Toronto got sleek, it got everyone's shoes dirty. In 1834, the town incorporated as the City of Toronto. A very exciting sentence if you love municipal paperwork. That paperwork mattered. Streets needed rules. Drains needed money. Markets needed space. Taxes needed someone to blame. Before rail, Distance was rude. Roads were slow. Weather was bossy. A wagon trip could ruin your optimism. Then in 1853, Toronto's first railway arrived. Suddenly the town had a metal handshake with the continent. Rails stitched the port to warehouses. Warehouses fed factories. Factories spilled workers into streets. The rail lands were not pretty. They were tracks, sheds, smoke, and spaghetti planning. Ugly, useful chaos. Speed made warehouses. Warehouses made money. Money made more warehouses. The loop was not subtle. Then the city got another reminder. Warehouses also make excellent fuel. On April 19, 1904, fire tore through downtown Toronto. Firefighters came from outside the city to help. The warehouse district learned humility at very high temperature. The fire was eventually controlled. But the losses were huge, and many workers lost their jobs. Then came insurance pressure, higher premiums, and new fire-resistant building rules. Toronto rebuilt with a little more brick and a little less wishful thinking. Cities love to call this planning. Often it is just learning after falling down, then wearing a hard hat and acting wise. By the 20th century, Toronto had a new problem. Too many people needed to move through the same narrow city. So workers dug under Yonge Street. Canada's first subway opened in 1954. Toronto finally gave its commuters a basement. A subway does not just move people. It moves land values, apartment buildings, offices, and the idea of where downtown can stretch. After the war, suburbs spread around the old city. Metro Toronto arrived as a bigger table for roads, sewers, transit, and arguments. Everyone got a chair. Nobody got everything they wanted. That is how you know it was government. Then in 1998, Toronto put on one huge municipal code. Old Toronto, East York, Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, and York got sewn together. The code fit. Sort of. Toronto has a pattern. It grows first, then holds meetings to explain what happened. Meanwhile, people kept arriving. Suitcases, recipes, languages, prayers, accents, jokes, businesses, whole lives. The route became a city you could hear. Today, Toronto is around 3 million people. Nearly half were born outside Canada. And in Canadian census language, more than half are visible minorities. That is not a side detail. It is the operating system. Shared streets, rent, subway delays, winter, food, opinions, and the sport of comparing neighborhoods. So yes, the CN Tower matters. It is visible. It is iconic. It photographs well. But it is not the engine. The engine is the carrying place. The fort, the harbor, the rail line, the fire rule, the subway, the suitcase, and the people who kept turning movement into home. That is Toronto's history in one rude little sentence. People gathered by a lake, moved things, argued over land, rebuilt after trouble, and kept arriving. Finally, the map gives up. It says, fine, you win. I am a city now.